is. I am. God is.
Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm going to move over to the center here. I always like to try and be centered if possible, both physically and other ways. Not always there, but, you know, one of my favorite friends used to say, had a story about a young novice going to the master and saying, "Master, how is it that you're always so centered?" And the master said, "Never centered, always returning to center." And that's always been a really good awareness for me, because the reality is that, you know, we're not always centered, but part of our work is to return to center and to return to that place where we are experiencing and knowing that connection that we have with our source, with the truth of our being, with the nature of who and what we are and what we've come here to be and what we've come here to experience and to express in our world and life. And this last week I got some really interesting awarenesses about that and my meditation times and my prayer times, and kind of got real clear that I wanted to share some insights and some thoughts and awarenesses about the whole process of returning to center, of prayer and meditation, and what that really has been for me, but also some of the resources that have really made a difference for me in being able to do that in life. When I'm able to do that, there are times, and I'll be honest with you, and you guys know me well enough, there are times when I get off center, and my work is really always to try and come back to that place. Always kind of come back to that place where I am really feeling and knowing and experiencing that oneness and that connection that we have with Spirit and with the divine. And one of the resources that has been most valuable for me on my journeys is a book from Eric Butterworth called The Universe is Calling, Opening to the Divine Through Prayer. How many of you have read this book? Any of you read this book? We got a few. Okay, good, good, good. Well, if you haven't read it, it's one I highly recommend. Eric Butterworth is one of my favorite Unity teachers and has really had a really powerful impact on my understanding and awareness of life and of prayer. One of the classic works that he has done is called Discover the Power Within. Many of you have read that one, and if you haven't, it's one of the primary books that actually has really inspired people like Oprah Winfrey and Maya Angelou and many others in life, and certainly thousands and millions throughout the world. And it's just a very practical understanding and awareness of the spiritual principles that Jesus has taught and how we can really experience those and live those in practical ways in our life. So as I'm looking at different ideas and thoughts about prayer and about meditation, I came across a couple of nice little stories that I'd like to share with you. I always like to have a little awareness about different thoughts and ideas about prayer. There was a little boy who was observed by a minister in church praying very fervently, but much to the minister's surprise, he heard him continuing to repeat the words Tokyo, Tokyo, Tokyo over and over again. And, you know, he's kind of curious about this. Why would he be saying Tokyo, Tokyo? And so after the service, he went up to the young man and said, "I really saw that you were really praying and just praying very fervently, obviously. But I heard you saying the word Tokyo over and over again. What was that about?" And he says, "Well, you see, I just took my geography exam, and I was actually praying that Tokyo be the capital of France." So that's one understanding of prayer. And there's another understanding of prayer. Dear God, so far today, I've done all right. I haven't gossiped, I haven't lost my temper, I haven't been grumpy, nasty, or selfish, and I'm really glad of that. But in a few minutes, God, I'm going to have to get out of bed. And from then on, I probably am going to need a lot of help. That's my mom's favorite. And then there was a mother listening in to the evening prayers of her sleepy little daughter and was astonished and amazed that she was to hear the following prayer. "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep, And when he hollers, let him go, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And there was a Sunday school teacher asking a young miss in her class to define prayer, and she said, well, prayer is a message sent up to God at night and on Sundays when the rates are lower. Well, there's all different kinds of awarenesses and understandings about prayer, it seems like. And I think all of us, in some ways, were probably taught when we were young different ways of praying. In some ways. If you weren't taught to pray, then you probably actually are better off than many of us that were. But the reality is, I'm convinced that all prayer is valuable. All prayer is good, and all prayer is worthwhile. And yet, I also am aware, and one of the things that Eric points out is that Jesus himself said that to the disciples, they were praying for different ones to be healed and to experience different things. And why weren't their prayers working? And Jesus said very clearly, because you pray amiss. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? There is a wrong way to pray. Or you can pray amiss at least. When I say wrong, probably that's not a really good word to use, but you can pray amiss. And I got to thinking about that and reflecting on what that means and what it means to pray amiss. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but it kind of implies that there is a way to pray that is more perhaps effective and efficient and worthwhile perhaps in some ways than other ways to pray. There are perhaps methods or ways to pray that we can tap into, that we can, oh, there we go. That's a way of praying also, interestingly enough, I'm convinced. But it's a way of actually tuning into something that is higher. It's a way of working with principle that allows things to work in a way that are bringing about even more benefit to ourselves and to those that we're praying with and for. Unity was really based on and founded in the idea of prayer. Myrtle Fillmore prayed, and as she prayed in a way that was bringing about an experience of greater health in her physical being. And as a result, she experienced a healing from tuberculosis. And Charles Fillmore, the very practical scientific mindset that he had, said, well, if this stuff really works, then there's a way to reproduce it. If this stuff really works, and he saw that it did with his wife, that she was experiencing healing and had experienced it and was able to share it with others, so he wanted to understand and know what are the things that are reproducible here that we can do and share. And then Eric, of course, Eric Butterworth, the co-founder of Unity, Charles Fillmore was the co-founder of Unity. Eric Butterworth learned from the co-founder of Unity many of these ways and methods of praying that have had a very wonderful and powerful effect in the lives of millions around the world through silent unity and through the individual groups that are practicing prayer. How many of you here pray? You don't have to raise your hand. You can if you want, but oh, good. That's good. Well, I suspect that much of what I'm going to be sharing and teaching will be singing to the choir, as they say. However, I think it's always valuable for us to look at and reflect on and look at ways that we are working with the energy and the power of prayer in our life. And if we are, and when we are. Because one of the things that we're learning, and we can learn in Unity, is that not only is it reproducible, but it is through a lot of the consistent practices of prayer that we really do experience the amazing benefits of prayer. Prayer is oftentimes, seen as a way of, well, when we think about prayer, let me ask you to ask this question of yourself. Why do I pray? Why do you pray? If you do pray, why do you pray? Centering, okay, good. Talk to God, good. Say it again. Guidance, very good, yeah. Comfort, good. Gratitude, yes, that's good, yeah. Feels better than talking to yourself, yeah, gotcha. To help others, yes. And I'm sorry, what?
Sometimes anger.
Sometimes anger, okay. I'm going to suggest something to you, and I'm just going to throw this out here, and you can accept this. I always encourage people to, when I say something, just kind of put it on the back burner. It may fit, and it may not. It may seem like it works in your awareness at this time, and it may not. But I'm going to suggest to you that you pray because you want something to change.
Yeah.
Usually when we pray, we want someone to change, right? Or we want something out there to change, right? And that's what we've been taught, really. We've been taught through a culture that prayer is about talking to God so God will change them. Isn't this true? And I'm going to suggest to you that part of our waking up and part of our learning, part of our growing in life is to begin to evolve and to mature in our awareness and understanding about prayer and what prayer is and how prayer can make a difference in life and how prayer absolutely can bring about change. And yet at the same time, what we are praying about is not so much about change as about really revealing that which doesn't change. About revealing that which doesn't need to change. Because it's always there, always available, always present, always loving, always giving. And so part of our work of our prayer is not so much to get things to change as it is to get ourselves and our awareness to change. So that's one of the things that Eric really shares with us, and there's some really great awarenesses in this work that really, I think, can help and make a difference in understanding how the effective use of prayer can allow change to happen in our lives and how we can participate in this activity of prayer in a way that we are instruments, that we are, as we talked about a little bit last week, instruments of the change that we wish to see in the world. Gandhi, of course, said, be the change you wish to see in the world. Part of that is learning to be that. And prayer is a way for us to learn how we can participate in being that change. So I have to ask a question. How many of you would like the temperature in this room to change? Would you like it cooler?
Yes.
Russell, are you available? Would you be willing to, see, isn't that simple? I mean, look how easy that is. Thank you, God. All right. I thought it was just me, but it's not, is it? Okay, we're sharing in this experience. So early on, we learn about prayer in ways that are valuable, but they sometimes can set us up for ways of thinking that can get in the way of really being a part of this effective use of the energy and the consciousness of prayer. He says, we teach our children to say their prayers before they go to bed, and they use words given to them such as, now I lay me down to sleep. How many of you learned that one? It's a good discipline, and it may have a positive influence on the child, but it can be terribly misleading. Unless children have the right idea of their relationship with God, they will grow up with a God up there attitude, and later in life they will still be saying their prayers without the slightest idea of what prayer is or how they should be praying. And he goes on to say, Jesus made it clear to his troubled disciples that though they were praying amiss. And so he talks a little bit about this idea, this understanding, that oftentimes when we are praying to something up there or out there. Now, I'm going to suggest to you there have been times when I have prayed to something up there and out there, and it's been very beneficial and helpful. And so I don't want to, and he also says the same thing. He doesn't want to discourage you from praying in that way if you feel that that is valuable for you. But there is a way of praying that can allow you to experience blessings in ways perhaps that you had not experienced before. And so he goes on to talk about the understanding that when we pray, there is a science to it, and that you and I are part of an opportunity to shift not only our awareness, but to shift the awareness of life, of those around us, of the world, in ways that allow even more of those blessings to come forth. He says, because tradition has conditioned us to perceive God as up there among billowy clouds, as suggested by Michelangelo's classic painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, prayer for most persons is reaching up and pleading and supplicating and bargaining. And I'm going to suggest to you, this is actually one of the things that I just kind of, it's a supposition, but when Jesus said that you pray amiss, I think this is one of the things that he was saying. That when we are in that place of pleading and supplicating and bargaining, we can sometimes connect with the divine, but the reality is that when we're in that place, we're focusing on change in a way that we don't want. And when you focus on what you don't want, you're actually putting more energy into what you don't want. And so praying amiss is oftentimes what I call worry. Worry is praying amiss. When you're worrying, you're actually praying. Do you realize that? You're putting your attention and your energy and your focus on what you do not want. You're trying to push away illness. You're trying to push away lack. You're trying to push away fear. You're trying to push away sadness. And what you resist persists. And so one of the ways that we learn to focus on and to bring about even more of the awareness of the blessings of Spirit is to begin to focus our awareness and our energy on what we truly do want in life. And focus on what we truly want to experience more of. And to focus on more of the presence of the divine. One of the things he points out in here I think is really interesting. He says, in many ways, many religions are really focused on the absence of God. Think about that for a minute. And their prayers is to get God to be present. To try and get the divine, which is, in unity we have this understanding that the divine is always everywhere present. So it's not to try to get God to come back into church or come back into our lives or come back into our experiences. There's a saying, about the prodigal son, The prodigal son was in a far country, but God was always at home. The presence of the divine is always available to us. And part of the work of prayer is not to try and get God to be somewhere else, to do something else, to be something else, but to get our understanding and awareness open to the great possibilities that the divine has and is in us and as us and through us and through those that we're praying for. Think about that for a moment. Think about what we can do when we begin to understand and see that when we pray for someone else, it's not necessarily about trying to get God to do something for them, but to reveal the presence of God within and through them. And for them to be able to see and experience that in ways that they perhaps have not experienced before. So yes, it still is a prayer for change, but it's not a prayer to change God. It's a prayer to change us and to change the awareness and the energy and the consciousness. There's that big word again, consciousness. To change the consciousness in which we and others are experiencing life and reality. And so as we begin to go through this series, we're going to explore different understandings and awarenesses about how we can more actively and more effectively participate in this process of allowing the presence of the divine to come through us in life in ways that we perhaps have not been able to do before, and to help us see others and help others, hold that awareness for others so that others can also experience more of that blessings in their lives and in their world. He talks a little bit about meditation, the importance of meditation and prayer, and I kind of got a little image about meditation and prayer and some of the differences between meditation and prayer. And he says, and I really think there's truth in this, is that meditation is really at the essence and the core of prayer. And there's a slight, subtle difference between meditation and prayer. Meditation, as I see it, think about it in terms of an image of a well. And if you have a well, prayer is taking your bucket and going to the well and drawing out the water of the well and then sharing it out in the world. Meditation is jumping in the well. And not only jumping in the well and being soaked by the water, but being in the well and being the water. And as you can you get that image? It's being the water and then being the water that's being drawn out through prayer and being shared through prayer. I got that image in my meditation. It just spoke to me. And I don't know if it speaks to you, but it speaks to me as a difference and a great image to hold about how we can participate in that activity and be a part of the presence of prayer and the divine in our lives for ourselves and for each other. So he goes on and he gives some great insights and awarenesses. He gives some history about prayer, and one of the poems he quotes here is from Longfellow. He says, that even in savage bosoms there are longings, yearnings, strivings for the good they comprehend not, that the feeble hands and helpless, groping blindly in the darkness, touch God's right hand in that darkness and are lifted up and strengthened. So one of the awarenesses and principles that he presents here is that there is an upward movement of spirit that is always, always working in our lives. There is a call that's going on. And you and I, right now, in this moment, are being called. We're being called to something more. Anybody here not want to experience more? Isn't that interesting? There's something more or different that we are all choosing and wanting to experience. Now, everyone in this room has a different understanding or awareness about what that is. It comes through the energy of desire. And there are those practices and teachings that say that, part of the spiritual work is to let go of all desire. And I think that's a really interesting practice because the desire not to have desire is a desire. Emily Cady says that desire is the presence of God knocking at the door of our consciousness, and I'm paraphrasing, knocking at the door of our consciousness to allow the very thing itself that we desire to come through. And that all that we are ultimately desiring is to experience more of the presence of the divine. Now, it may come in lots of different forms and lots of different ways. We may experience it in this world in ways that others may say that don't recognize or connect with that being something divine at all. And yet there is, within the heart of every human being, a desire. I'm going to suggest to you that we do not leave this earth. That's not quite the way I want to say that. Let's see. Everyone who is in this earth is being motivated and moved in some form, in some way, by a desire. Many desires, and some of those desires are very conflictual. Some of those desires are, we don't recognize or understand them. But it is what really does move us forward. I'm going to suggest to you the moment that we let go of all desire, including the desire not to have desire, the desire is actually to be somewhere else, and we are. Just a thought. Maybe. Just a thought. So it's not that we're trying to get rid of all of our desires. What we're trying to do is understand what really is it that we desire. And I'm going to suggest to you that we really ultimately all want and desire one thing. And that is the experience and the presence of the divine. It can take many forms as abundance. It can take many forms as life. It can take the form of love. It can take the form of joy. It can take the form of peace. And those can have lots of different forms attached to them, right? And yet they're all ways that we can experience more of the presence of God. And the challenge we have is we think those things are the answers to our prayer. But they're simply ways that the divine manifests and shows up in our lives so that we can see that there is something more. There's something more. So, as we go through here, one of the things that I wanted to talk a little about, and he shares, is even though we start off learning to pray, and mankind has prayed throughout history in different ways, different forms, sometimes that the cavemen put paintings up on the walls before they went out on a hunt, and they put themselves in the picture and they saw themselves having a successful hunt. I'm going to suggest to you that was a way of trying to pray. We are praying beings. We have consistently prayed throughout history. But one of the things that Eric talks about is it's important for us to begin to escape what he calls the miracle trap. And I was taken back from when I first read this, because I was really came up in Unity in a time where everyone was saying, expect a miracle. And he's going to suggest, and he's suggesting in this work, that he's not trying to take away from the understanding that amazing and things happen that are just absolutely beyond our awareness of how it's possible for them to happen. But he's suggesting that we tap out of this energy, this idea of miracle-mindedness. And the reason why he wants us to tap out of that is because it tends to still put us in this awareness that there's something out there that is going to take care of all of this, and we don't have to do anything. We just have to pray for a miracle. And the way scientific prayer works is that God can only do for us what God can do through us. I'm going to say that again. This is a really valuable awareness that Eric presents. God can only do for us what God can do through us. Now, what God can do through us really has to do with what can God do through our consciousness. Now, when we talk about consciousness, we're not talking about just our thinking and our feeling, but our whole energy and awareness and our whole nature and being. And so the purpose of prayer really is to allow the energy and the consciousness that is in us to expand to the place where we can see and know the possibilities of blessing, the possibilities of creative power, the possibilities of good, and that those already exist for us in life. And so part of our work is to shift our energy and our awareness from praying to something up there, out there, into allowing something working through us to express something more than what we were perhaps able to experience or express before, to see things perhaps in a different way, to understand in a different way, and to be open to even greater possibilities of good, even beyond our limiting beliefs about what's possible. That makes sense? So a big piece of the work of scientific prayer is an expansion of awareness. It's expansion of our consciousness. It's one of the first fruits of prayer. Ed Rabel was one of my teachers in ministerial program, and one of the things he said is that he quoted Charles Fillmore and said that one of the first fruits of prayer is an expanded awareness. It's one of the first things that happens when we pray, and prayer is answered. We see things differently. We have a different understanding. We have a different knowing. And sometimes that comes from a place of just simply being at peace. Sometimes it comes from a place of acceptance. Sometimes it comes from a place of getting an insight and divine idea about how we can show up differently, or how we can accept what is and move into something else. Make sense? So, as we go through these awarenesses, one of the things that he talks about is we are here to learn how to participate in this activity of prayer in a way that allows us to experience life from a fuller place. One of the things that I got in my meditation not too long ago that really spoke to me is don't ever let your experiences in life get in the way of your possibilities. I love that. It just spoke to me. You see, we have lots of experiences in life, and we tend to think that that's the way life is. And we tend to judge life based upon our experiences, or the experiences of those who have presented their experiences to us and we accepted those, right? Kind of like the programming that we get as we grow up through life. But don't ever let our experience in life determine our possibilities. Because the possibilities that you and I have are so far beyond our current experiences that we can't even imagine them yet. And that's part of what the work of prayer is also, and what the work of prayer can do. It helps us to escape the limitations of our own awarenesses and thinking so that we can move into a greater possibility of love, of relationships, of joy, of peace, of life, of wholeness and health, of prosperity and abundance. And we are all continually on that journey. Whether we like it or not, interestingly enough, we're on that journey. Now, we may be using our faculties to avoid it, to try and resist it, but there is this impulse throughout the universe that is always moving us in the direction of wholeness. And that's one of the magnificent, beautiful things about life and about spirit. I want to close with one of the things he quotes here from Henry David Thoreau. He says it all in these lines from this essay from Walden. If one advances confidently in the direction of his or her dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind, will pass an invisible boundary, new, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within, or the old laws will be expanded and interpreted in his favor and in a more liberal sense, and he will live with the license of a higher order of being. You and I are being called to that. That's the universe calling. There's something that knows within every one of us that there's something more for us. There's something more for us to be. There's something more for us to experience. There's something more for us to share. There's something more for us to be a part of. And that is the call of the universe. And we open ourselves to that call by practicing the principles of scientific prayer. We're going to talk more about those principles of scientific prayer and how we can tap into that call and be and step into that experience of the more that we have come here to be and experience next week. Next week we're going to talk about karma and grace. Karma and Grace, two of my favorite names, actually. Come back next week. Let's have some more fun with this. Let's move into our meditation time. And as you breathe in and out, allow yourself to sink now into that well of absolute being, of love, of oneness, Allow yourself to be immersed and filled. And allow yourself to be light. Eric says, God is not in us like a raisin is in a bun, but like a wave is a part of the ocean, and yet is still the ocean. So as you breathe in and out, let your awareness rest and relax into that feeling, into that assurance that not only is the divine always present, the divine is always present in me, and the divine is always present to express through me, as the I am of being. And we listen in this silent place within the very essence to that still small voice that is always saying, I am. God is. Breathing in, God is. And breathing out, I am. And all the possibilities and qualities of the divine are available to flow and to express through our unique human nature. And we allow ourselves to be open to the greater possibilities of knowing, of feeling, of experiencing, of being and expressing. The strength, the love, the power, the peace, the joy that God is. In the silence. In the silence. Take now a nice deep breath, letting the heart open and expand even more to the energies of light and love and peace, and to the possibilities of an even greater good. Take another nice deep breath and give thanks for the desires of our heart, and knowing that Spirit is always trying to express through us as a greater experience of light and love and peace and joy. Take another nice deep breath and let your awareness be fully in this place and time, and know that you are immersed in that presence, always and in all ways. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. And so it is.